The sound of gunfire tore through the night as Catherine Baker pressed her back against the weathered wall of the stagecoach station, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. The year was 1875, and what should have been a fresh start in the Arizona Territory had quickly descended into a nightmare. Outlaws had ambushed the stagecoach just outside of Silverwood Creek, killing the driver and scattering the passengers to the wind. Catherine had barely escaped with her life, running blindly through unfamiliar terrain until she'd stumbled upon this abandoned outpost as darkness fell. Blood seeped through her torn sleeve where a bullet had grazed her. The pain was sharp, but fear was sharper. Catherine clutched her small carpet bag, all that remained of her possessions, and strained to hear any sounds of pursuit through the howling desert wind. She had come west to take a position as a schoolteacher, leaving behind the suffocating confines of Boston society after her parents' deaths had left her alone and nearly destitute. Now, she wondered if she would live to see morning. A floorboard creaked behind her, and Catherine spun around, her breath catching in her throat. A tall silhouette filled the doorway, moonlight glinting off the barrel of a revolver. "Don't move," a deep voice commanded. Catherine froze, her vision blurring with tears of terror. "Please," she whispered, "I have nothing of value." The figure stepped forward, and the pale moonlight revealed a man in his early 30s, his features hard but handsome beneath the shadow of his hat. Dust covered his denim trousers and leather vest, and a star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "You're hurt," he said, holstering his weapon and approaching slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "I'm Nathan Xavier, Deputy Marshal for this territory. Those outlaws after you." Catherine nodded, unable to speak as relief and exhaustion washed over her. Her knees buckled, and he moved with surprising agility to catch her before she hit the floor. "Easy now," Nathan said, his voice gentling as he guided her to a wooden bench. "What's your name, miss?" "Catherine Baker," she managed. "The stagecoach to Silverwood Creek was attacked. I ran." Nathan's expression darkened. "The Faro gang. Been tracking them for days." He examined her arm with careful hands. "This needs tending. I've got a cabin about a mile from here. It's not safe to stay, they might circle back." Terror seized Catherine anew. Go with a stranger? A man she'd just met in the middle of nowhere? But what choice did she have? Nathan seemed to read her thoughts. "I know you've got no reason to trust me, Miss Baker, but I give you my word as a lawman and as a man with me, you'll know only gentle hands. I aim to get you to safety, nothing more." Something in his steady gaze and the quiet dignity of his words calmed her racing heart. Catherine nodded and allowed him to help her to her feet. "My horse is outside," he said. "Can you ride?" "Aye. It's been years," she admitted. "You'll ride with me then. Hold tight to that bag of yours." Outside, the night was alive with the sounds of the desert. Nathan helped her onto his chestnut gelding before mounting behind her. The solid warmth of him at her back was both terrifying and reassuring as they set off into the darkness, leaving the station behind. "What brought you to this territory, Miss Baker?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice low as they rode. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher in Silverwood Creek," she replied, wincing as the horse's movement jarred her injured arm. "Brave thing to do, coming all this way alone." "Not brave," Catherine said. "Necessary. After my parents died, there was little left for me in Boston." Nathan made a sound of understanding. The West offers new beginnings, but it demands much in return. They rode in silence after that, the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the vastness of the star-scattered sky overwhelming Catherine's senses. Eventually, fatigue claimed her, and she found herself leaning back against the deputy's chest, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Almost there," Nathan murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Stay with me a little longer, Miss Baker." When they finally arrived at the cabin, Catherine was barely conscious. She was vaguely aware of being lifted from the horse, of being carried in strong arms through a door and placed on something soft. Gentle hands removed her boots and covered her with a blanket. "Rest now," came Nathan's voice from somewhere above her. "You're safe." Her first night in the Arizona Territory was spent in fear, but as Catherine drifted into sleep, she found unexpected comfort in the presence of the Deputy Marshal and the promise of his gentle hands. Morning light streamed through small windows, waking Catherine from a deep sleep. For a moment, Disorientation gripped her as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings: rough-hewn log walls, a simple table and chairs, a cast-iron stove in the corner. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, along with a throbbing pain in her arm. She sat up slowly, discovering that she was on a narrow bed pushed against one wall of the cabin. Her wounded arm had been cleaned and bandaged while she slept. A blanket had been tucked around her, and her shoes placed neatly beside the bed. The cabin door opened, and Nathan entered, carrying an armful of firewood. He paused when he saw her awake, a cautious smile warming his weather-lined face. "Good morning, Miss Baker. How's the arm feeling?" Catherine touched the bandage. "Better, I think. Did you tend to it?" He nodded, depositing the wood beside the stove. "Basic doctoring comes with the badge in these parts. It's not too deep, should heal clean if we keep it from festering." "Thank you," she said, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Her dark brown hair had come loose from its pins, and her traveling dress was torn and stained with dirt and blood. As if sensing her discomfort, Nathan turned to busy himself with the stove. "I've got coffee brewing and some bacon to fry up. You must be hungry." Catherine's stomach growled in response, and a blush heated her cheeks. "Famished, actually. Thought as much." He glanced over his shoulder. "There's a wash basin behind that screen if you'd like to freshen up. I found a clean shirt you can use. It'll be too big, but it's better than that torn sleeve." Catherine waited until he was occupied with breakfast preparations before slipping behind the screen. The wash basin was filled with cool water, and a cake of simple soap sat beside it. The luxury of washing away the dirt and fear of the previous night was indescribable. She did her best to pin up her hair, then changed into the offered shirt, rolling up the sleeves and tucking it into her skirt. When she emerged, Nathan had set 2 plates on the table, steam rising from the simple fare: bacon, beans, and biscuits that looked surprisingly appetizing. "It's not fancy eating," he said, pulling out a chair for her, "but it'll keep your strength up." "It looks wonderful," Catherine assured him, taking a seat. "I didn't realize how hungry I was." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Catherine worked up the courage to ask, "What happens now?" Nathan set down his coffee cup. "Silverwood Creek is about a day's ride from here. I'll take you there once I'm sure those outlaws aren't lingering in the area." "The stagecoach driver," Catherine said, her appetite suddenly diminishing as she remembered the man's lifeless body slumped over the reins. "He was killed. There were other passengers too, a family with children. I'll ride back to the attack site after breakfast, see if I can find any survivors, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "The Pharaoh gang doesn't usually leave witnesses." Catherine shuddered. "Why was I spared?" "You ran into the brush where the horses couldn't follow easily. They probably figured you wouldn't survive the night out here anyway." His eyes met hers across the table. "Most city folk wouldn't have. I've never considered myself particularly resilient," Catherine admitted. "And yet here you are." There was a note of admiration in his voice that warmed her more than the coffee. After breakfast, Nathan saddled his horse. "I need to check the stagecoach site. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" Catherine nodded, though the thought of being alone in the isolated cabin sent a tremor of fear through her. "Bolt the door behind me," he instructed, strapping on his gun belt. "There's a rifle above the fireplace if you need it." "I've never fired a gun," she confessed. Nathan paused, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Then let's hope today isn't the day you have to learn." He hesitated, then added, "I'll come back for you, Miss Baker. You have my word." After he left, Catherine secured the door and set about exploring the small cabin more thoroughly. It was sparsely furnished, but meticulously neat. A bookshelf held a surprising collection of volumes: history, law books, and several novels. On the mantel sat a tarnished silver frame containing a daguerreotype of a young woman with a gentle smile. Catherine wondered about the woman in the photograph. Was she waiting for Nathan somewhere? The thought brought an unexpected pang of something she wasn't ready to examine. To distract herself, she took down one of the books, a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. She settled in a chair by the window where she could watch for Nathan's return while keeping an eye on the approach to the cabin. The hours passed slowly. Catherine dozed intermittently, startling awake at every creak and rustle from outside. By late afternoon, anxiety had her pacing the floor, wondering if Nathan had encountered the outlaws again or if he'd simply abandoned her here. Just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Catherine grabbed the rifle from above the fireplace, holding it awkwardly as she peered through the window. Relief flooded her when she recognized Nathan's broad-shouldered silhouette. She unbolted the door and stepped onto the porch, still clutching the rifle. Nathan dismounted, leading his horse and another a dappled mare laden with bags. "You found survivors?" Catherine asked hopefully. Nathan's expression was grim as he tied the horses to the hitching post. "No, the gang took everything of value, and—" He looked at her, seeming to decide against sharing the details. "I did find some of your belongings scattered about. Thought you might want them back." Catherine set aside the rifle and hurried down the steps. "My things. I'd assumed everything was lost." "Not everything." He handed her a leather satchel. "Your name was on some letters inside. There's clothing too, though it's a bit worse for wear." Catherine clutched the satchel to her chest, unexpectedly moved by this simple kindness. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay your help." "No need for that," Nathan said, unsaddling his horse. "Just doing my job. Is that all it is?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Nathan paused, his hands stilling on the saddle straps. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and Catherine feared she'd overstepped. Then he turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "No, Miss Baker. I reckon it's not just that." His voice was rough, honest. "But that doesn't change what needs doing. You need to get to Silverwood Creek, and I need to track down those outlaws before they hurt anyone else." The practical reality of their situation settled over Catherine like a cold blanket. Of course, this wasn't some romantic adventure. People had died, and more would if the Pharaoh gang wasn't stopped. "When do we leave for Silverwood Creek?" she asked, her voice steady despite the strange disappointment curling in her stomach. "First light tomorrow," Nathan replied. "It'll be safer that way." That night, Nathan insisted on sleeping outside on the porch so Catherine could have the bed. Despite her protests that she could make do with a blanket on the floor, he was adamant. "You've been through enough, Miss Baker. A good night's rest will serve you well for tomorrow's journey." As she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night, Catherine found herself thinking of the man just outside the door. There was something about Nathan Xavier that intrigued her, a complexity beneath his quiet strength that made her want to know more. It was foolish, she knew. In a day's time, they would reach Silverwood Creek, where she would begin her new life as a schoolteacher, and he would continue his pursuit of justice. Their paths had crossed by chance, nothing more. Yet as sleep claimed her, Catherine couldn't help but wonder what might have been under different circumstances. Dawn broke clear and cool, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold. Catherine awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the cabin. She found Nathan at the stove, cooking a simple breakfast of flapjacks. "Good morning," he said, glancing up as she emerged from behind the privacy screen. Dressed in her own clothes now, a simple blue traveling dress she'd salvaged from her recovered belongings. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, moving to help him set the table. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same tin plate, and Catherine felt a flutter in her chest at the brief contact. "The mare I brought back is gentle enough," Nathan said, seeming not to notice her reaction. "You can ride her to Silverwood Creek. I've packed some provisions and your things." "You've thought of everything," Catherine said, sitting down to breakfast. Nathan shrugged, "Just being practical." They ate quickly, neither mentioning the night before or the conversation that had hovered on the edge of something more. When the dishes were washed and the cabin secured, Nathan helped Catherine mount the mare, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs. "Remember, keep your heels down and the reins loose but firm," he instructed, his hands briefly encircling her waist to steady her on the saddle. Catherine nodded, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his touch. "I may be from Boston, Deputy Xavier, but I'm not entirely inexperienced with horses." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I never assumed you were, Miss Baker." They set off as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, riding side by side across the vast landscape. Catherine was struck by the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory, the towering red rock formations, the scattered juniper and pinyon pines, the endless sky stretching blue and boundless above them. It's beautiful, she murmured, almost to herself. That it is, Nathan agreed, his gaze sweeping the horizon. Different kind of beauty than what you're used to, I expect. Yes, but no less magnificent for its differences. She glanced at him. How long have you lived out here, Deputy Xavier? Going on 10 years now. Came west after the war. You fought in the Civil War? He nodded, his expression closing slightly. Union Army. Saw things no man should have to see. Catherine sensed his reluctance to elaborate and changed the subject. And you became a lawman afterward? Not right away. Tried my hand at prospecting, then ranching. Neither suited me. He adjusted his hat against the strengthening sun. Turned out I had a knack for tracking and a strong dislike for men who prey on others. A noble calling, Catherine said sincerely. Nathan looked somewhat embarrassed by her praise. Just doing what needs doing. What about you, Miss Baker? What brings a Boston lady to teach in a place like Silverwood Creek? Catherine considered how to answer. The full truth was complicated and not entirely proper for casual conversation. After my parents died, I found myself with few options. I was trained as a teacher, but had little opportunity to practice in Boston without family connections. When I saw the advertisement for a position out west, it seemed providential. Must have taken considerable courage, Nathan observed. Or desperation, Catherine replied with a small, self-deprecating smile. My father's debts left me with little choice but to seek opportunity elsewhere. Nathan studied her with newfound respect. Courage often masquerades as necessity, Miss Baker. They rode on, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack beside a shallow creek. Catherine removed her boots and stockings to cool her feet in the water, then blushed when she realized how forward such an action might seem. But Nathan merely smiled and turned his attention to refilling their canteens, giving her privacy. As they continued their journey, Catherine began to see signs of civilization: fenced pastures, the occasional distant ranch house, wagon tracks crossing their path. By late afternoon, Nathan pointed to a smudge on the horizon. Silverwood Creek. We'll be there before sunset. Catherine felt a curious mixture of relief and regret. Their journey was coming to an end, and with it, this strange interlude with the deputy marshal who had saved her life. I suppose I should thank you properly, she said, reining her horse to a stop. For saving my life, for your kindness, for escorting me safely to my destination. Nathan halted beside her, his expression softening as he met her gaze. No thanks needed, Miss Baker. It was a gunshot cracked through the air, cutting off his words. Nathan's horse reared in alarm, and Catherine screamed as 3 riders appeared from behind a nearby ridge, guns drawn. Well, if it ain't Deputy Xavier, called one of the men, a tall figure with a scarred face. And look, boys, he's found our missing lady for us. Nathan had his gun out in an instant, positioning his horse between Catherine and the newcomers. Pharaoh, he growled. I should have known you'd circle back. Couldn't leave unfinished business, now could we? The man called Pharaoh grinned maliciously. That fine lady's carrying something that belongs to me. Catherine clutched her reins tightly, confusion and terror washing over her. I don't know what you're talking about. I have nothing of value. That's so. Pharaoh's eyes narrowed. Then you won't mind if we search those bags of yours. You'll do no such thing, Nathan said, his voice deadly calm. Ride away now, and I might let you live. The outlaws laughed. 3 against 1, lawman. Poor odds for you. I've faced worse, Nathan replied, and Catherine saw his hand tighten on his revolver. What happened next occurred with terrifying speed. Guns fired, horses reared, and Catherine found herself being yanked from her saddle by Nathan's strong arm as he spurred his horse forward. She landed hard against his chest, clinging desperately as they galloped away from the ambush, bullets whizzing past them. Hold on. Nathan shouted above the thundering hooves and gunfire. Catherine buried her face against his shoulder, terror consuming her as they raced across the uneven terrain. She heard Nathan's gun fire twice more, followed by a cry of pain from behind them. They rode hard for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes before Nathan guided his horse into a narrow ravine, hidden from view by towering rock walls. Only then did he slow their pace, breathing hard as he scanned their surroundings. Are you hurt? He asked, his arm still secure around her waist. No, Catherine managed, her voice shaking. What did they mean? What could I possibly have that they want? Nathan shook his head. I don't know. Did you notice anything unusual among your recovered belongings? Catherine thought of the satchel, now tied to the mare they'd left behind during their escape. There was nothing of value, just clothing and personal items. They must believe otherwise. Nathan guided his horse deeper into the ravine. We need to find shelter. Night's coming, and they'll be hunting us. The gravity of their situation settled over Catherine like a heavy cloak. They were being pursued by killers, miles from safety, with only one horse and Nathan's weapons between them and death. This is my fault, she whispered. If you hadn't helped me, don't, Nathan said firmly. This isn't on you. The Pharaoh gang has been terrorizing this territory for months. They'd have crossed my path eventually. As the ravine widened, they came upon the remains of an old mining camp, a collapsing wooden structure built against the rock face, partially hidden by overgrown brush. We'll stop here for the night, Nathan decided, dismounting and helping Catherine down. Inside the abandoned shelter, Nathan quickly assessed their resources. They had his canteen, his weapons, and whatever meager supplies were in his saddlebags. Catherine still had her small carpet bag clutched in her arms, the one thing she'd managed to keep with her throughout the ordeal. We should check what's in there, Nathan suggested, nodding toward the bag. If there's something they want, we need to know what we're dealing with. Catherine opened the carpet bag, emptying its contents onto the dusty floor: a spare chemise, a hairbrush, a small Bible that had belonged to her mother, a packet of letters tied with ribbon, and a few personal keepsakes, including a silver locket containing miniature portraits of her parents. Nothing here worth killing for, she said, puzzled. Nathan knelt beside her, examining each item carefully. When he picked up the Bible, something fell from between its pages: a small key attached to a numbered tag. What's this? He asked, holding it up. Catherine frowned. I've never seen it before. It must have been placed there after the stagecoach attack. Nathan turned the key over in his palm, his expression grave. It's a bank key, from the First National Bank of Tucson. He looked up at her. Someone slipped this into your belongings, probably thinking they could retrieve it later. But what does it open? A safe deposit box, most likely, containing something valuable enough that Pharaoh is willing to kill for it. Night fell swiftly, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that seeped through the walls of the abandoned structure. Nathan built a small, smokeless fire in a corner where the light wouldn't be visible from outside, then settled beside Catherine, draping his coat over both of them for warmth. We'll head for Silverwood Creek at first light, he said, checking his revolver by the dim firelight. It's closer than turning back, and there's a sheriff's office there. Catherine nodded, trying to control her shivering. Despite the fire and the coat, the desert night chill seemed to penetrate to her very core, or perhaps it was fear that made her tremble so. Nathan hesitated, then put his arm around her shoulders. Body heat, he explained, his voice gruff with what might have been embarrassment. Most effective way to stay warm. Catherine knew she should protest such familiarity, but instead found herself leaning into his solid warmth. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in silence for a time, listening to the wind whistling through the canyon and the occasional cry of a coyote in the distance. Tell me about Boston, Nathan said eventually, his voice soft in the darkness. What was your life like there? Grateful for the distraction, Catherine began to speak of her childhood home, the brick townhouse near the common, the changing seasons, the cultural events her mother had loved. She spoke of her father, a professor of literature whose investments had failed spectacularly shortly before his death, leaving her mother and herself in dire financial straits. After mother followed him to the grave just 6 months later, there was nothing left but debts and memories, she concluded. Coming west seemed the only option. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Nathan observed. What about you? Catherine asked. You mentioned the war, but not what came before. Nathan was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held a distance, as if the memories were physically far away. Grew up in Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith, taught me the trade. Had a younger sister named Emily. He paused. Lost both of them to typhoid when I was 19. Enlisted not long after. I'm sorry, Catherine said, instinctively placing her hand on his arm. War changed everything. Nathan continued, his voice low. Came west afterward because I couldn't bear to go home to empty rooms and memories. And the woman in the photograph on your mantel? Catherine asked before she could stop herself. Nathan stiffened slightly, then relaxed. My sister. That picture was taken just before she fell ill. Oh, Catherine felt a peculiar sense of relief, then immediately chastised herself for it. What did it matter to her if Nathan Xavier had a sweetheart waiting? There's no one else, he said, as if reading her thoughts. Haven't allowed myself that. Complication. Is that what it would be? A complication? In the dim firelight, his eyes met hers. Out here? For a man with a badge and enemies? Yes, Miss Baker, it would be exactly that. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment, Catherine thought he might say more or perhaps do more, but instead, he gently disentangled himself and stood. You should try to sleep, he said, his voice returning to its usual practical tone. I'll keep watch. Catherine curled up on the hard ground, using her carpet bag as a pillow, and pretended not to notice the sudden coldness where his arm had been. Morning arrived with a soft golden light filtering through the cracks in the weathered walls. Catherine awoke to find Nathan's coat still draped over her, but the man himself was nowhere to be seen. Panic fluttered in her chest until she heard the sound of hoofbeats outside. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. We need to move. Found tracks about a quarter-mile back. They're still hunting us. Catherine scrambled to her feet, hastily gathering her few possessions. How far to Silverwood Creek? About 5 miles as the crow flies, but we'll need to take a less direct route to avoid being spotted. He handed her a strip of jerky. Eat this. No telling when we'll get another chance for food. Outside, Nathan's horse stood saddled and ready. He helped Catherine mount, then swung up behind her, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. Stay low and hold tight, he instructed, urging the horse forward. They rode through the ravine until it opened onto a broader plain, then cut across country, keeping to the low ground and stands of juniper where possible. Nathan's body was tense against Catherine's back, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. What will happen when we reach Silverwood Creek? Catherine asked during a brief pause to rest the horse. First, we get you somewhere safe. Then I telegraph the marshal's office in Tucson about that key. Nathan offered her the canteen. Once we know what's in that safe deposit box, we'll have a better idea of what we're dealing with. And if the Pharaoh gang follows us to town? Nathan's expression hardened. Then they'll find more than one gun waiting for them. Silverwood Creek might be small, but its people stand together against threats. They rode on, the sun climbing higher in the sky, beating down mercilessly. By midday, Catherine could see buildings in the distance, the outskirts of Silverwood Creek. Relief washed over her, tempered by the knowledge that danger still pursued them. As they approached the town, Nathan guided his horse onto the main road. Try to look natural, he said quietly. No need to alarm the townsfolk yet. Silverwood Creek was larger than Catherine had expected, a proper town with a main street lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, a hotel, a saloon, and what appeared to be a schoolhouse at the far end. People moved about their business, a few glancing curiously at Catherine and Nathan as they rode past. Nathan directed the horse toward a sturdy building with sheriff painted above the door. As they dismounted, a portly man with a gray mustache stepped onto the porch, adjusting the badge on his vest. Xavier, wasn't expecting to see you this way. His eyes moved to Catherine, taking in her disheveled appearance and the dried blood on her sleeve. Trouble. Pharaoh gang, Sheriff Daniels, Nathan confirmed, helping Catherine down. This is Miss Catherine Baker, your new schoolteacher. She survived their attack on the Tucson stagecoach 2 days ago. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. The stage was hit? Damn. Anyone else make it? Not that I found, Nathan said grimly. Sheriff Daniels turned to Catherine, his manner softening. Miss Baker, welcome to Silverwood Creek, though I'm mighty sorry about the circumstances. We've been expecting you. School board had rooms arranged at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. Thank you, Sheriff, Catherine managed, her legs unsteady after the long ride. She needs a safe place to stay, Nathan interjected. The gang's still after her. We think they believe she has something of value. The sheriff's expression grew serious. Mrs. Holloway's is as safe as anywhere right across from my office, and the widow keeps a shotgun behind the counter. He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Though if Pharaoh's involved, might be best to have some extra eyes watching. I'll stay, Nathan said firmly. At least until we sort this out. Catherine felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something warmer at his words. Sheriff Daniels nodded. I'll send a rider to notify the marshal in Tucson. Meanwhile, let's get Miss Baker settled and tended to proper. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a two-story clapboard structure with lace curtains in the windows and pots of geraniums on the porch. The proprietress herself, a robust woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, took one look at Catherine and declared that she needed a hot bath, a proper meal, and rest, in that order. The school board's arranged for your room and board as part of your position, dearie, Mrs. Holloway explained as she led Catherine upstairs. This'll be your home now. It's the best room in the house, has its own washstand and a view of the street. The room was small but immaculately clean, with a brass bed, a wooden dresser, and a desk beneath the window. After days of fear and discomfort, it looked like paradise to Catherine. The gentleman who brought you, he's staying too? Mrs. Holloway asked, a hint of disapproval in her tone. Deputy Xavier has been protecting me, Catherine explained. There are dangerous men who may come looking for me. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. Well, in that case, I suppose he can have the room at the end of the hall. For propriety's sake. After Mrs. Holloway left to prepare bath water, Catherine sat heavily on the bed, the events of the past days crashing over her in waves. She was safe, at least for now, but the sense of being hunted lingered like a shadow. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Nathan standing awkwardly in the hallway, his hat in his hands. Sheriff Daniels sent a wire to Tucson about the key, he said. Also had one of his deputies ride out to scout for any sign of Pharaoh and his men. Thank you for staying, Catherine said quietly. You've done more than duty requires already. Nathan met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them. It stopped being about duty a while back, Miss Baker. Before Catherine could respond, Mrs. Holloway appeared at the end of the hall, announcing that the bath was ready. Nathan tipped his hat and retreated, leaving Catherine with a fluttering heart and questions she wasn't ready to articulate. The luxury of a hot bath and clean clothes worked wonders for Catherine's spirits. By evening, she felt almost human again, though the wound on her arm still throbbed dully beneath its fresh bandage. Mrs. Holloway served a hearty supper in the dining room downstairs: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie, which Catherine shared with Nathan and two other boarders, a young bank clerk and an elderly gentleman who worked at the general store. After dinner, Sheriff Daniels arrived with news. Telegram came back from Tucson, he announced, joining them in Mrs. Holloway's parlor. That key opens a box registered to a federal agent who was investigating the Pharaoh gang. He disappeared 3 weeks ago, presumed dead. What's in the box? Nathan asked. Evidence, the sheriff replied. Names, dates, locations, everything needed to bring down not just Pharaoh, but his entire operation, including whoever's backing him financially. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. And they think I have this evidence. They think you have the key to it, which amounts to the same thing. Sheriff Daniels looked grim. Marshal's office wants you both to come to Tucson as soon as possible, under armed escort. When? Nathan asked. Day after tomorrow. Takes time to arrange proper protection. The sheriff glanced at Catherine. Meanwhile, Miss Baker, the school board is eager to meet you. They've scheduled an introduction for tomorrow morning, if you're feeling up to it. Catherine hesitated. The idea of proceeding with normal activities while killers might be searching for her seemed surreal. Yet what was the alternative? Hide in her room until the escort arrived? I'll be there, she decided. I came to teach, after all. After the sheriff left, Nathan walked Catherine back upstairs, pausing outside her door. You don't have to attend that meeting tomorrow, he said. No one would think less of you for wanting to lie low. Catherine straightened her shoulders. I refuse to let fear dictate my actions. Besides, I suspect the distraction would be welcome. A smile touched Nathan's lips, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his blue eyes. You continue to surprise me, Catherine Baker. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. Good night, Deputy Xavier, she said, suddenly shy. Nathan, he corrected gently. After all we've been through, I think we're beyond formalities. Nathan, she echoed, savoring the shape of his name on her lips. Good night. Inside her room, Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the main street of what was to be her new home. Lamps glowed in windows, and a few people still moved about on evening errands. It looked peaceful, ordinary, hard to believe that danger might be closing in. As she prepared for bed, Catherine found her thoughts continually returning to Nathan. In just a few days, he had become her protector, her guide, and perhaps, though she hardly dared acknowledge it, something more. Yet soon they would reach Tucson, deliver the key, and then what? Would he return to his solitary cabin and his duty as a deputy marshal? Would she stay in Silverwood Creek to teach? The possibilities and uncertainties swirled in her mind as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the curtains and the sounds of the town coming to life. Catherine dressed carefully in her best remaining outfit, a dark green skirt and white shirtwaist, and pinned her hair neatly. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror above the washstand seemed both familiar and strange, the same Catherine Baker who had left Boston, yet fundamentally changed by her experiences. Downstairs, she found Nathan waiting in the dining room, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt beneath his leather vest. He stood when she entered, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. You look well, he said simply. As do you. Catherine accepted the cup of coffee Mrs. Holloway offered. Will you accompany me to the school board meeting? Wouldn't miss it, Nathan replied. Sheriff Daniels has deputies watching the town approaches, but I'd feel better keeping you in sight. The schoolhouse stood at the end of the main street, a white clapboard building with a small bell tower. Inside, 5 people waited to meet Catherine. The mayor, a cattle rancher, the general store owner, the local doctor, and a stern-looking woman introduced as Mrs. Pemberton, the previous teacher who had retired due to her advancing years. We're delighted you've arrived safely, Miss Baker, Mayor Collins said, pumping her hand enthusiastically. When we heard about the stagecoach attack, we feared the worst. Quite the story of survival, I understand. Catherine smiled politely, downplaying the danger. I was fortunate that Deputy Xavier found me when he did. The board members exchanged glances at this, and Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rose slightly. Yes, quite fortunate indeed, she said, her tone suggesting she might have more to say on the matter in private. The meeting proceeded with discussion of Catherine's duties, the school calendar, and the 23 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old she would be teaching. Despite the circumstances, Catherine found herself growing excited about the position. Teaching had always been her passion, and the opportunity to shape young minds in this frontier community appealed to her deeply. School is set to begin next Monday, Mayor Collins explained. Gives you a few days to settle in and prepare. The last teacher left her lesson plans, which might help you get started. As they were concluding, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the schoolhouse windows, Catherine saw a rider galloping down the main street, heading for the sheriff's office. Nathan was instantly alert, moving to the door. Stay here, he instructed, his hand moving to his holster. But before he could step outside, Sheriff Daniels appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Farrow and his men were spotted at a ranch about 5 miles out, he announced without preamble. 3 of them, asking questions about a woman matching Miss Baker's description. The school board members looked alarmed, turning to stare at Catherine with new understanding. What's going on? Mayor Collins demanded. Why would outlaws be looking for our schoolteacher? Nathan quickly explained about the key and its significance, causing further consternation among the board. This puts the entire town at risk, exclaimed the rancher, Mr. Peterson. Not if we act quickly, Sheriff Daniels countered. I'm organizing men now. We'll intercept them before they reach town. And Miss Baker? Mrs. Pemberton asked, concern evident despite her stern demeanor. I'll take her somewhere safe until the escort from Tucson arrives, Nathan said firmly. My ranch, offered Mr. Peterson after a moment's consideration. It's in the opposite direction from where they were spotted, and I've got men who can help keep watch. Sheriff Daniels nodded. Good plan. Xavier, you take Miss Baker to the Peterson place. I'll handle things here and send word when the federal marshals arrive. Events moved swiftly after that. Within an hour, Catherine found herself on horseback again, riding beside Nathan toward the Peterson ranch. Mrs. Holloway had hastily packed food and necessities, and Mr. Peterson had sent a ranch hand ahead to alert his wife of their coming. "I'm sorry about this," Catherine said as they rode away from town. "It seems I've brought nothing but trouble since I arrived." "None of this is your doing," Nathan replied firmly. "You're as much a victim in this as anyone. Yet because of me, an entire town is now under threat." Nathan guided his horse closer to hers, his expression earnest. "Catherine, listen to me. What's happening isn't about you, it's about justice. That key you're carrying accidentally is evidence that could stop men who've been terrorizing this territory for months. You haven't brought trouble, you've brought hope." His words warmed her, chasing away some of the guilt that had settled in her chest. They rode in companionable silence after that, the landscape opening around them into grassy rangeland dotted with cattle. The Peterson Ranch was impressive, a large main house, several outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses for the ranch hands. Mrs. Peterson, a capable-looking woman in her 40s, welcomed them warmly despite the circumstances. "Any friend of John's is welcome here," she said, ushering them inside. "I've prepared the guest room for you, Miss Baker. Mr. Xavier, you can bunk with the hands or take the sofa in the study, your choice." "The study would be better," Nathan said. "I want to stay close." Mrs. Peterson nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I'll have Consuela bring up some hot water for washing, and dinner will be ready in an hour. Meanwhile, make yourselves at home." Left alone in the comfortable parlor, Catherine sank into a chair, the tension of the day catching up with her. Nathan remained standing, peering out the window at the approach to the ranch house. "Do you think they'll find us here?" she asked quietly. Nathan turned to face her. "It's possible, but not likely. Peterson's ranch is well guarded, and it's a fair distance from where Pharaoh was last seen. And tomorrow? Tomorrow the federal marshals should arrive in Silverwood Creek. Once they do, we'll head for Tucson with the key." He sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "This will end soon, Catherine, one way or another." Something in his tone caught her attention. "And then what happens?" Nathan hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. "That depends." "On what?" "On what you want to happen." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Catherine found herself unable to look away from his intense gaze, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. "I came west to teach," she said carefully. "That hasn't changed." "And I took an oath to uphold the law," Nathan replied. "That hasn't changed either." "Then it seems our paths are set." Nathan shook his head slowly. "Nothing's set in stone out here. The West is a place of new beginnings, remember?" Before Catherine could respond, Mrs. Peterson returned, breaking the moment. Dinner was a quiet affair, with Mr. Peterson still in town helping organize the defense against the possible outlaw incursion. Afterward, claiming fatigue, Catherine retired to the guest room, though sleep eluded her as she pondered Nathan's words and the future that seemed both uncertain and full of possibility. Morning brought news via a ranch hand who had ridden to town at first light. The federal marshals had arrived in Silverwood Creek, but so had trouble. The Pharaoh gang had engaged in a shootout with Sheriff Daniels and his deputies on the outskirts of town. One outlaw was dead, another wounded and captured, but Pharaoh himself had escaped and was believed to be heading toward the Peterson Ranch. "We need to move," Nathan said grimly after hearing the report. Now, within minutes, they were on horseback again, this time accompanied by two armed ranch hands. Their destination was a lined shack in the high country, a simple structure used during cattle drives that would be difficult to find without knowledge of the terrain. They rode hard through the morning, following game trails and dry creek beds to minimize their tracks. By midday, they had climbed into pine-covered foothills, the air growing cooler and thinner. Not much further, one of the ranch hands, a weathered man named Hank, assured them. Catherine was exhausted, her body aching from days of hard riding, but she pressed on without complaint. Nathan rode close beside her, his presence a constant reassurance. The lined shack, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room cabin with a stone fireplace, a rough table, and bunks built into the wall. The ranch hands quickly secured the horses and gathered firewood while Nathan checked the perimeter. "We should be safe here for the night," he said when he returned. "At first light, we'll head straight for Tucson. It's a hard day's ride, but we can make it if we push." The ranch hands departed after securing the cabin, leaving Catherine and Nathan alone as darkness fell. They shared a simple meal from the provisions Mrs. Peterson had packed, then sat before the small fire, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. "When this is over," Nathan said finally, "what will you do?" "Stay in Silverwood Creek as planned." Catherine considered the question. "I signed a contract to teach for a year. I intend to honor that commitment." She looked at him. "And you?" "I've been thinking about that." Nathan poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "The marshal's office in Tucson offered me a permanent position some months back. I turned it down, preferring to work the territory. And now," he met her gaze steadily, "now I'm reconsidering. Tucson's not far from Silverwood Creek, close enough for regular visits." Catherine's heart quickened. "Is that something you'd want? Regular visits?" "It's something I've hardly allowed myself to want," Nathan admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Since the war, I've kept to myself, telling myself it was better that way. Safer. And now," Catherine whispered. Nathan reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Now I find myself thinking that some risks might be worth taking." The touch of his calloused fingers against hers sent warmth spreading through Catherine's body. She knew she should pull away. They were alone, unchaperoned, in a situation that would scandalize Boston society. Yet here in the wilderness, with this man who had protected her, respected her, and seen her courage even when she doubted herself, such concerns seemed distant and unimportant. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would welcome those visits." Nathan's expression softened, and he gently tugged her hand, drawing her closer until she sat beside him on the rough bench. His arm encircled her shoulders, and Catherine allowed herself to lean into his warmth. "When I found you at that stagecoach station," he said softly, "I saw a woman who had every reason to break, but chose strength instead. I admired that from the first moment." "I was terrified," Catherine confessed. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it." His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You've shown more courage in the past few days than most men I've known in a lifetime." Catherine looked up at him, at the sincerity in his blue eyes, and felt something shift inside her, as if pieces of herself that had been scattered by grief and upheaval were finally settling into a new pattern. "Nathan," she whispered, hardly knowing what she meant to say next. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, but Catherine found herself leaning up to meet him. Their lips touched gently at first, then with growing certainty. His hand cradled her cheek with the promised gentleness, and Catherine felt herself melting into the kiss, into the safety and warmth of his embrace. When they finally parted, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you stood up to me at the stagecoach station, pointing out that Boston ladies aren't entirely helpless." Catherine laughed softly. "And I've wanted you to since you promised me gentle hands that first night." They stayed by the fire, talking in low voices about their pasts, their hopes, the possibilities that might lie ahead if they survived the danger that still pursued them. Eventually, the fire burned low, and practical considerations could no longer be ignored. "You should take the bunk," Nathan said. "I'll keep watch." Catherine nodded, suddenly shy again despite the intimacy they had shared. As she settled onto the narrow bunk, Nathan draped his coat over her as he had done that first night in the abandoned mining camp. "Sleep well," he murmured. "Tomorrow we end this." Catherine awoke to the gray light of dawn and the smell of coffee. Nathan was already up, his expression alert as he moved quietly about the small cabin. "No sign of trouble," he reported when he saw she was awake. "But we should move quickly. The sooner we reach Tucson, the sooner you'll be truly safe." They ate a hurried breakfast, then saddled the horses and set out as the sun crested the eastern mountains. The path down from the high country was steep and treacherous in places, requiring all their concentration. It was mid-morning before they reached more level ground and could push their mounts to a faster pace. They rode steadily through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. The landscape changed gradually around them, the pine forests giving way to mesquite and cactus as they descended toward Tucson. By late afternoon, they could see the city in the distance, a sprawling collection of adobe and wood buildings nestled in the broad valley. "We made it," Catherine breathed, relief washing over her. But Nathan remained tense, his eyes scanning the terrain. Don't celebrate yet. This is when we need to be most vigilant. His caution proved warranted. As they approached the outskirts of Tucson, following a well-traveled road now, the sound of hoofbeats behind them made Nathan turn sharply in his saddle. Riders coming fast, he said grimly. 3 of them. Could be coincidence, or it could be Pharaoh, Catherine finished, fear clutching at her heart. Nathan made a quick decision. We'll split up. You ride straight into town, head for the marshal's office on Congress Street. I'll delay them. No, Catherine protested. I won't leave you to face them alone. This isn't a debate, Nathan said firmly. You have the key, that's what matters now. Go. With that, he wheeled his horse around, drawing his revolver as he positioned himself in the middle of the road. Catherine hesitated only a moment before spurring her horse toward Tucson, tears blurring her vision as the sound of gunfire erupted behind her. The streets of Tucson were crowded with wagons, riders, and pedestrians who scattered as Catherine galloped through, her hair coming loose from its pins and streaming behind her. She had no idea if Nathan was still alive, if Pharaoh was still in pursuit, or even exactly where the marshal's office was located. She could only push forward, driven by fear and determination. A man in a deputy's uniform spotted her wild approach and stepped into the street, hand raised. Whoa there, miss. What's the trouble? Catherine reined in her horse, gasping for breath. Deputy Xavier, Federal Marshal's Pharaoh gang. Recognition dawned in the deputy's eyes. You're the Baker woman. From Silverwood Creek. Yes. There's shooting just outside town. Nathan's holding them off. The deputy whistled sharply, summoning several other lawmen who had emerged from a nearby building. Get her to the marshal's office, he ordered one of them. The rest of you with me. Catherine found herself being escorted to a solid brick building where a stern-faced man with a federal marshal's badge took possession of the key and ushered her into a private office. There, she told her story in halting sentences, her thoughts constantly returning to Nathan facing Pharaoh and his men alone on the road. Deputy Xavier is one of our best, the marshal assured her when she expressed her fears. And we've got men riding to his aid now. The important thing is that you've delivered this key safely. What happens now? Catherine asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Now we open that deposit box and put Pharaoh and his backers away for good. The marshal regarded her with respect. You've done a brave thing, Miss Baker. It was nearly dusk when the door to the marshal's office opened and Nathan walked in, his left arm bandaged and his face smudged with dirt and gunpowder, but very much alive. Catherine flew across the room without thinking, throwing her arms around him. He winced slightly but returned the embrace with his good arm. You're hurt, she said, drawing back to examine the bandage. Just a graze, he assured her. Nothing serious. And Pharaoh? Dead, Nathan said simply. His remaining man surrendered. It's over, Catherine. Truly over. The marshal cleared his throat. Good work, Xavier. Miss Baker was just helping us make sense of the evidence from the deposit box. Turns out Pharaoh was working for some very powerful people who wanted to control shipping routes through the territory. And now? Nathan asked. Now those people will face justice, the marshal replied. And you, Xavier, have earned yourself a commendation and that permanent position in Tucson, if you still want it. Nathan's eyes found Catherine's. I believe I do, sir. The next days passed in a whirlwind of official statements, telegrams to Silverwood Creek, and arrangements for Catherine's return to take up her teaching position. The school board, upon learning of her role in bringing down the Pharaoh gang, seemed more impressed than scandalized by her adventure. Nathan, meanwhile, accepted the position with the marshal's office in Tucson, with the understanding that his duties would occasionally take him to Silverwood Creek for official business. On her last evening in Tucson, before the stagecoach would carry her back to Silverwood Creek, Nathan took Catherine to dinner at the finest hotel in town. They sat across from each other in the elegant dining room, a far cry from the abandoned mining shack where they had first acknowledged their feelings. It feels strange, Catherine admitted, to be going back to start a normal life after everything that's happened. Is that what you want? Nathan asked. A normal life? Catherine considered the question. I want to teach. I want to make a difference in my students' lives. She met his gaze steadily. But I also want more than that. Nathan reached across the table to take her hand. I told you once that the West is a place of new beginnings. I believe that now more than ever. When will you come to Silverwood Creek? She asked. As soon as my duties allow. And perhaps. He hesitated, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his expression. Perhaps when I do, we might discuss a more permanent arrangement between us. Catherine's heart leaped at his words. That would require a proper courtship, Deputy Xavier. A smile touched his lips. I believe I'm equal to the task, Miss Baker. The stagecoach journey back to Silverwood Creek was uneventful blissfully, so after the dangers Catherine had faced. She arrived to find the town buzzing with excitement over her adventure and the upcoming start of the school year. Mrs. Holloway welcomed her back with motherly concern, and the school board had arranged for the schoolhouse to be freshly painted in her honor. True to his word, Nathan visited frequently in the months that followed. His official business in Silverwood Creek became something of a local joke, especially when those visits coincided with school holidays or special events in which the new teacher participated. Their courtship proceeded with proper decorum in public, though the moments they managed to steal alone were filled with deepening affection and plans for a shared future. When Nathan proposed 6 months later, on a spring evening with the desert in bloom all around them, Catherine accepted without hesitation. They were married in the Silverwood Creek Church, with the entire town in attendance and Sheriff Daniels standing as Nathan's best man. The federal marshal himself came from Tucson for the occasion, bringing news that the last of Pharaoh's powerful backers had been convicted. None of it would have been possible without you two, he told them at the reception. Sometimes fate has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. Catherine, radiant in a simple white dress that Mrs. Holloway had helped her make, looked up at her new husband. I think fate had help, she said. From a deputy marshal who promised a frightened woman she would know only gentle hands. Nathan's smile was tender as he drew her close. A promise I intend to keep for a lifetime. They made their home in Silverwood Creek, with Nathan commuting to his duties in Tucson and Catherine continuing to teach. The following year, they welcomed their first child, a daughter with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. 2 years later, a son joined their family, completing the home that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Catherine would think back to that terrifying night at the abandoned stagecoach station, to the fear that had consumed her and the unexpected salvation that had arrived in the form of a solemn deputy marshal. She would look at Nathan across their cozy parlor and marvel at how far they had come, at the love that had grown from danger and uncertainty into something as solid and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. And Nathan, catching her gaze, would set aside his book or his paperwork and cross to her side, taking her hands in those hands that had protected her, comforted her, and ultimately brought her home to a love she had never imagined finding in the wild Arizona territory. What are you thinking about? He would ask, though he already knew the answer. And Catherine would smile, leaning into his embrace with the certainty of a woman who had found her place in the world. I'm thinking that sometimes the most frightening nights lead to the most beautiful dawns. He would kiss her then, as tenderly as he had that first time in the lined shack, and Catherine would know with absolute certainty that the journey with all its dangers and hardships had been worth every step. For in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the American West, they had found not just safety or success, but something far more precious. They had found each other. And in doing so, they had transformed fear into courage, danger into strength, and 2 solitary paths into one shared journey that would continue, hand in hand, into whatever adventures awaited them beyond the horizon.